thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be able to interact here again from you and to be able to share some of my thoughts. This has been an unusual year, is something which I don't need to say again, but the kind of unhesitating number of interactions that you as industry have offered, shared your ground level inputs, shared your suggestions for solution, shared your thoughts about what actually is transpiring in the ground with the Prime Minister, with the Finance Minister, with the Commerce Minister, and without hesitating giving us the time so that the government can come up with not one but several interventions. Actually, therefore, together, yourself, the government, and the entrepreneurs themselves have made it possible for India to stand out in the world to show how economies with self-confidence can recover. So the recovery is something which is entirely due to the actual real-time consultative process, actual real-time response process, and without any cynicism, industry engaging with the government as many number of times as was required has kept India through 2020 with largely positive feeling that somehow we'll come out of this. I concede that there are very many difficulties even now, difficulties at different layers even now, but I'm sure with this kind of a to and fro sharing of inputs, all of us together can see better days, and also because the vaccine is likely to come, we can be a lot more confident that this pandemic will be behind us and we shall surge forward as an economy under the leadership of the Prime Minister, who untiringly works to ensure that every section gets heard, everyone's input is taken. And there are times when for some reason, if they have met with the Prime Minister, the inputs which he has received is within 24 hours passed on to the Finance Ministry, and we sit and go through it every bit. So there is no information gulf between the PMO or with the various ministries concerned. So information sees its own, like water flow, it flows consistently for all of us to work and come up with redressal mechanisms. Just for a starter, I would like to say, what is it that we have, other than the tailoring of the projects themselves, the kind of money which has gone through each one of these announcements. Just for a recall, total of 30 lakh crores has been committed in these various announcements. The first one which came was, as you all rightly pointed out, aiming at protecting lives, making sure nobody goes to bed with empty stomach, making sure that everyone gets at least one good meal in a day, and so on. So the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana was first announced, and that meant 1.9 lakh crores. 93 lakh crores. Then came the Atmanirbhar 1.0, which was for 11 lakh crores. Post that was the PM Anna Yojana, Garib Anna Yojana, which meant the grains and pulses were freely distributed for 8 continuous months, which ended in November, for 80 crore people, all of whom were under the poverty level or just above poverty level, and that meant 0.83 thousand crores. Atmanirbhar Package 2.0 was for 0.73 lakh crores. And finally, Atmanirbhar Package 3.0 was for 2.65 lakh crores. If this was from the ministry, from the government of India, RBI did its own to up to 12.7 lakh crore, totally reaching a 30 lakh crore target. And just because we're talking numbers, I just want to give you this thing that during the BE, if in my borrowing statement I had put in a certain figure, about 7 lakh crores, it had gone up to about 12 even when we announced a calendar of borrowing. And as of November 20, we had already borrowed so that our expenditure doesn't suffer. We had already borrowed 9.05 lakh crores from the market. That is about 68% more than the last year. So, recognizing that this is an unusual year, our borrowing has been kept absolutely at levels with which we can quickly put the money back in projects, put the money back in capital expenditure, and so on, so that the money goes down to the ground. This emphasis that the public infrastructure spending should have to be kept up has been fully recognized, and I have made sure that at least once in a month I sat with all the departments at the secretary level with the CPSCs belonging to that department, Central Public Sector Enterprises, which come under each of these departments, to make sure what was provided for them through the BE in the budget will be spent on the capital expenditure in time. Even they could not move faster because the ground was such that either the destination from where they had to reach out was under lockdown, or the destination where they had to go was under lockdown, or somewhere in between they were containment zones. And therefore, not just the absence of migrant workers, but project completions did have a very peculiar circumstance where the money was in their hand, that which was given to them as a provisioning, capex provisioning allotment for the capital expenditure during the BE, they could not even undertake during the lockdown stages, quarter 1 and quarter 2, but by quarter 3, many of them have made up for what they had lost out in terms of spending. So that emphasis on public expenditure for infrastructure through the public sector undertakings will be definitely kept up, and the NIIF, the National Infrastructure Investment Fund, is also doing maximum best to attract funds from abroad. The sovereign funds which have been given tax concessions have all been showing keen interest, and the National Infrastructure Pipeline announcement which was made of about nearly 6,500 projects, greenfield and brownfield, spread all over the country in various states, are all being given priority. So strictly speaking, my budget related inputs which you give me, I'm quite happy and eager to take on board, jot down the notes, and also wait for you to send me your inputs. But from my end, as regards the budget, there's nothing that I would be able to give you a clue of, because that's the nature of how the budgets are prepared. However, something which I had said earlier, and something which certainly will be a feature, is we shall definitely sustain the momentum on public spending in infrastructure, because that is the one way we are sure the multipliers will work and the economy's revival will be sustainable. So we fully appreciate and take that point on board. I shall do everything that it takes to make sure that the budget will have these inputs coming from you, influencing it, and a call is then taken. On the disinvestment, I've heard the several voices about you can't have one disinvestment today and maybe just about 2 or 3 in a year. I understand. Since the time 2019 we have come in, you had a situation where by the time the economy and the liquidity related questions were addressed in 2019, we moved over to 2020, and by the time we could have again started on the disinvestment efforts, came COVID. But I assure you, you would have seen in the last 2 months the pace in which the two major disinvestment related activities and also the other which are relatedly bringing down the government share in some of the big public sector undertakings are also simultaneously happening. The pace of disinvestment will now gain a lot of momentum, and those which have already found cabinet approval will be taken up with all earnestness. So this investment will be happening. Corporatization of not just the defense DRDO related labs, but also banks, where I want them to run a lot more professional. They should also be able to, basing their values in the market, should be able to raise money from the market. Even that emphasis is being given. So you're finding a lot of not just uh, reform linked, but also that which helps the economy to get that traction and get that stimulus, so that all aspects of the economy are getting equally addressed. Debt market related is going to be a long-term reform related activity, but we have not left that behind. We have taken a lot of steps in order that the Indian debt market is deepened, widened, and broadened, so that the advantage of liquidity available outside at such cheap rate is going to be able to come into this country with a better debt market, bond market being developed. So many of the factorization bill, the other bills which were pushed through the last parliament sessions are all indicative of the steps that we want to take in the financial sector. So what I would, and I'm glad today, the industry, particularly ASSOCHAM, which represents a large chunk of MSME, has understood the intention of the government. We are very clear that MSMEs form the backbone of this country. I constantly do remember that in our export baskets, particularly the engineering one, nearly 40% of all the engineering exports were undertaken by the MSMEs. So if that is one section, there are others. Today, automobile component manufacturers are largely present in medium scale. So we are making sure that we are consciously addressing issues faced by every section, and so is the question of the hotels and hospitality. They are going to take a bit of a time till such a time that global travel is resumed. Their impact on them for revival is also going to get deferred to that much, is something which we are keeping conscious of. And that is why in between, when the package of the emergency credit liquidity guarantee scheme was looked into once in between, I had extended it across the board also to include professionals and other partnerships which will need that help. So we are constantly receiving thoughts and also making sure that that kind of a change or tweaking of the existing projects are also undertaken, so that once done, we are not going to be rigid about saying that's it, we are not doing anything about it, let's wait for the next. We are constantly yielding to the changes which are called for. And with that approach, I suppose with all the inputs which you have given me today and likely to send me in the next few days, I am conscious that the forthcoming budget will have a vibrancy which is so required for the economy's revival, sustainable revival. So I seek all your cooperation, which you have given the Prime Minister throughout this year, even in very difficult times. I'm sure even now your inputs will be coming in. We welcome them, we value them, we shall be working on them and making sure everything that this government does is something which will be part of what you have aspired for. Each one may have a lot of aspiration. We'll try to match up as much as you expect, but across the board, we'll also meet up with everybody's aspirations. So thank you for giving me